Daniel didn't celebrate. That's the part nobody tells you. He'd been making that payment for 19 years, $1,940 a month. Same account, same date, first of every month, automatic, invisible, like breathing, and then one Tuesday morning in October, the notification came. Loan closed. Balance, $0. He made coffee, stood at the kitchen window, watched a squirrel do something complicated in the yard, and felt almost nothing. Not relief, not joy, not the cinematic exhale he'd been quietly expecting for nearly 2 decades. Just silence. And then about 72 hours later, something started to shift. Not in his bank account, in the way he was thinking, in the questions he was suddenly asking himself, in the decisions that were quietly becoming available that had been locked away for 19 years without him ever realizing they were locked. This video is about that shift, not the payment going away. That part is simple arithmetic. This is about the hidden math, the numbers nobody puts in a spreadsheet, the costs that never appear on a mortgage statement, and the specific reason that 2 people can make the same final payment and end up living completely different lives 3 years later. By the end of this video, you're going to understand 3 things most mortgage content never touches. First, what the mortgage was actually costing you that had nothing to do with the interest rate. Second, why the math changes the moment the payment disappears, and why most people waste that moment completely without knowing they're doing it. And third, the number your lender never showed you. The one that, once you see it, makes the entire 30-year structure look like something other than a loan. We'll get to that number. It's going to land differently than you expect. But first, let's go back to Daniel, because his story doesn't start with the payoff. It starts about 4 years earlier, on a night his wife Rachel said something that stopped him cold. They were sitting at the kitchen table after the kids were in bed. Rachel had been offered a position at a non-profit she'd quietly been in love with for years. Less bureaucracy, more meaning, more of what she'd gone into her field to actually do. The salary was $14,000 less per year. She slid the offer letter across the table. Daniel looked at it. And then he did something that told the whole story of their financial life without either of them naming it. He opened the budget spreadsheet. Not because they didn't trust each other, not because money was more important than Rachel's happiness, but because there was a number at the top of that spreadsheet that governed everything beneath it. $1,940 a month. And before any conversation about meaning or purpose or what Rachel actually wanted could happen, that number had to be satisfied first. They said no to the offer, not dramatically, not with a fight. They just looked at the math and made the rational decision that the math required. Rachel stayed. They moved on. Life continued. And here's what I want you to notice. Daniel and Rachel are not irresponsible people. They have no boat. They've never been to Europe. They did everything the script told them to do. And they still spent 19 years making every major life decision through the silent filter of one question. Can we still cover the mortgage? That question is the hidden cost. It doesn't appear in any interest calculation. No lender discloses it. It doesn't show up in the 30-year total you sign at closing. But it runs in the background of your life, every single day, for the entire length of your loan. And it shapes decisions in ways that compound just like interest does, except in the wrong direction. Let's talk about what this actually looks like in dollars. because the math is more uncomfortable than most people sit with. The average mortgage payment in 2025 is $2,300 to $29 for principal and interest. For anyone who bought at current rates, the real number is closer to $2,845. The median American household takes home about $5,400 a month after taxes. That means the average mortgage is consuming 43 cents of every take-home dollar before a single grocery is bought or a single bill is paid. Every financial professional on the planet agrees that 28% is the responsible ceiling for housing costs. Most mortgage holders are running 15 points above that every month for 30 years. And they've normalized it so completely that it no longer feels like a problem. It just feels like Tuesday. Now here's the number your lender never showed you. On a $450,000 mortgage at 6.5%, your monthly payment is $2,844. Standard, manageable. You sign the papers and you move in. Over 30 years, the total interest on that loan is $573,840. Let that sit for a second. You borrowed $450,000. You will pay back over $1 million. The bank will collect more from you in interest alone than the entire original value of the home. More than the house cost, just in interest. That is the agreement. That is what you signed. And it is stated clearly in the closing documents that almost no one reads all the way through, because the monthly payment is the only number that feels real in that moment. This is not a complaint, it's a description. The mortgage is a legal, widely used, genuinely useful financial product. But understanding what it actually costs, not just per month, but in total, and not just in dollars, but in decisions, is the foundation of everything that comes next. So what is the hidden math? It's this. The mortgage doesn't just cost you money. It costs you your financial independence number. Here's what that means. Financial independence, the point where you no longer need a paycheck to cover your life, requires roughly 25 times your annual expenses saved and invested. That's the math behind the number. If your life costs $60,000 a year, you need $1.5 million invested to be free. Now watch what happens when the mortgage disappears. Daniel and Rachel's mortgage was $1,940 a month. That's $23,280 a year in mandatory expenses. When it's gone, their annual cost of living drops by $23,280, which means their financial independence number just fell by $582,000. They didn't earn more money. Daniel didn't get promoted. Rachel didn't launch a business. They didn't do anything clever or heroic. They just changed what survival costs. And that single change, that reduction in their floor, is worth more than $500,000 of wealth that they would otherwise have needed to accumulate. This is the math no one puts in the brochure. This is what the bank's office doesn't tell you when you're signing the 30-year paperwork. The mortgage isn't just a loan against your house. It's a loan against your freedom number. And every month it exists, it's holding your financial independence further away from you. Now, before we go further, there's a question sitting in the room, and it deserves a real answer, not a dismissal. If your mortgage rate is below 5%, the math technically favors investing the difference over aggressively paying down principal. A 3% guaranteed return from eliminating debt historically loses to an 8% equity return over time. That argument is mathematically correct. Here is what it assumes. It assumes you actually invest the difference. Most people don't. The mortgage was forced savings, a mandatory monthly commitment that moved money out of your account whether you felt like it or not. When it becomes discretionary cash, a significant percentage of households quietly absorb it into lifestyle within 18 months and have nothing to show for it. It also assumes you can watch your investment portfolio drop 40% in a market crash, while still writing a mandatory check to the bank every single month. That is a fundamentally different psychological experience than watching the same drop from a house you own completely and cannot lose regardless of what the market does. Here's the honest framework. Above 7%, aggressive payoff is a strong, competitive, guaranteed return. Hard to argue against. Between 4.5% and 7%, it's a genuine judgment call. Run your own math. Know your own behavior. Below 4.5%, invest the difference, but only if you will actually invest it every month without touching it. The real answer has never been a rate. It's always been knowing yourself well enough to be honest about what you'll actually do with the money when no one is requiring you to do anything with it. Back to Daniel. 72 hours after the payoff notification, he's sitting across from his manager in a quarterly review. And something is different. Not in the room, in him. His manager is explaining why the timeline on a project Daniel has been leading needs to move up again, and why the team will need to work through the following Saturday again. And Daniel is listening, nodding, processing. But the thought running underneath it is not the usual one. It's not, I need this job. The mortgage depends on this. That thought, which had been the background frequency of his professional life for 19 years, is simply not running. What's running instead is quieter and stranger and more honest. Do I actually want to keep doing this? He doesn't quit that day. He doesn't make any dramatic move. But over the following 6 months, Daniel has 3 conversations with his manager that he would never have had before. Not confrontational, just honest, about workload, about direction, about what he's actually good at versus what he's been assigned because he's reliable and never pushes back. One of those conversations leads to a lateral move into a division he's been curious about for years. Different work, same salary. But he chose it. And Rachel goes back to that non-profit. Different role, slightly better than the one she turned down. But this time, when the offer letter slides across the table, Daniel doesn't open the spreadsheet first. He asks, "Is this what you want?" She says yes. He says, "Then let's figure out how." That is what changes after you pay off your house, not the balance sheet. The first question. Here is the version of this story that nobody makes a video about, because it isn't dramatic, because there's no triumph in it. Someone pays off their mortgage, feels the relief, looks at $2,000 a month suddenly available, and then, gradually, reasonably, one decision at a time, watches it disappear. The kitchen remodel that's been on hold for 5 years. The car that genuinely needs replacing. The vacation that finally feels affordable. The private school tuition that feels justified now. All legitimate, all expensive, all competing for the same money. 18 months later, the mortgage is gone. But the financial pressure is identical, just distributed differently. Different debt. Same ceiling. The payoff is a hinge. It opens a door, but it does not push you through it. The single most important financial decision available in the 12 months after your mortgage is paid off is this: automate the redirect before your lifestyle has a chance to expand into the space. Take the freed up payment, not all of it, but most of it, and make it as automatic and invisible as the mortgage was. Max your 401k match first, because that is a guaranteed 50 to 100% return, and nothing else on this list touches it. Then the Roth IRA, $7,000 in 2025, growing completely tax-free for the rest of your life. Then the full 401k contribution limit. Then a taxable brokerage account with low-cost index funds. If you redirect $2,000 a month this way, at a historical average of 8%, you have $365,000 in 10 years. $1.17 million in 20. Not because you did something brilliant. Because you survived the mortgage, closed the last tab, and finally gave compound interest the room it always needed. The room the bank had been renting from you for decades. One practical note before we close, because this matters more than it sounds. The day your final payment processes, verify that your lender filed the lien release and that you receive your deed. Lenders occasionally simply don't file it, and you discover this years later when you try to sell and learn that you don't legally own what you've been paying for. It is tedious. It is essential. File it under things that are boring and non-negotiable, which is most of what actually matters in adult life. Then, before you redirect a single dollar, rebuild your emergency fund. You have been running lean. Get 6 to 12 months of your new lower expenses sitting in liquid savings before you do anything ambitious. The house cannot write a check. It cannot cover a medical bill. It cannot fund 3 months of expenses while you figure out your next move. The paid-off house is the floor. What you build above it determines everything else. Here's what I want you to carry out of this. The mortgage was never simply a large bill. It was a permission structure. For most of your adult life, it was the first consultation for every decision that mattered. Want to leave the job that's taking something from you? Check with the mortgage. Want to take a pay cut to do work that means something? Make sure the mortgage is safe first. Want to start something that needs 2 years to get profitable? Not until the mortgage approves. That's not weakness. That's math. The mortgage required it. But the hidden math, the math no one shows you in the bank's office, the number that doesn't appear on any statement, is the cost of that permission structure over 30 years, in decisions not made, in risks not taken, in questions asked second instead of first. Daniel and Rachel never got back the 4 years they said no with, but they got the years that followed. That is what changes after paying off your house. Not just the cash flow, not just the compounding. The first question changes. And when the first question changes, everything built on top of it changes with it. If this video gave you something worth keeping, consider subscribing. I make videos like this every week at Finance Artify. I'll see you in the next one.